Nothing is more magical on a cold winter day than looking outside your window and seeing snow-covered, shimmering evergreens in the distance. And with the faux window technique, you can create that feeling on your holiday cards, too. Let me show you the tools and products you're going to need for this technique. First, you're going to need some sort of multicolored ink pad. And in this case, I'm using a Kaleidacolor Blue Breeze Rainbow Dye ink pad. You're also going to need a Versamark pad and some embossing powder, and I'm using the Stampendous White Detail Embossing Powder. You're going to need an anti-static pad, and that's to take away static off of your cardstock and remove any oils when you're ready to emboss. You're going to need some cardstock, and I'm using the Gina K Designs Pure Luxury Heavy Base Weight White. You're also going to need a rubber stamp. And in this case, I'm using a stamp from the Holiday Cheer stamp set from the Stamp TV kit. And I picked a somewhat detailed image, but it's the perfect kind of image that you would expect to see outside of a window. It's the 3 pine trees. You're going to need a brayer, some adhesive, and I also have a piece of cardstock that I'm going to mat my pieces on once I cut all these apart and create my window, which I'll show you in just a little bit. Okay, so to get started, we're going to begin by brayering first. We're going to brayer some of the Kaleidacolor ink onto our little square of cardstock. And let me just grab a scratch piece of paper here. Now, if you've never used one of these types of ink pads before, you're going to notice that there's 5 different color inks and they're all spaced apart, and there's a little line in between each ink. That's the way you store it. This way the colors won't bleed together during storage. But for using them, you just press right there and it presses them all together so you won't get lines between the colors. One of the best ways to eliminate any lines at all between the colors is when you're inking up your brayer, rather than just going straight like this, to kind of angle it a little bit and just turn it side to side. Also, when you're inking up a brayer, you never want to ink back and forth like this, because then you only get ink on that little bottom half of your brayer. You want to make sure that when you ink, and then you lift, and then you ink, and then you lift, and then kind of do it a little bit side to side too to blend those lines together. And this way, the barrel does complete rotations and you get ink all the way around. Okay, so once you've inked up your brayer, grab that little square of cardstock, and then you're going to kind of go in a little bit of a V motion back and forth. And that will also eliminate lines from just going straight across. It kind of blurs and blends everything together. So let me wet the brayer again with some ink, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay. See, I'm kind of going back and forth. And if you have a little bare spot at the top or at the bottom, that's okay. Just re-ink up your brayer and ink up your piece of cardstock again. Remember that what we're doing here is we're creating kind of a sky background. And you don't want it to be perfect because the sky isn't completely symmetrical. It's got different hues and different shades, so that's fine. Once it all comes together, you'll see how pretty it looks. Okay, now the next step is going to be to rub some of the anti-static pad over this cardstock, but because I just inked it up, I'm just going to dry it a little bit with my heat tool, and that will just eliminate us having to wait another couple minutes to continue the process. Okay. Now, using the anti-static pad, I'm just going to pat some of that all over the surface of my card and then just kind of rub it. Okay. And now I'm going to ink up my 3 pine trees using a Versamark pad. And then I'm going to stamp that right into the center of my card. Like that. All right. Now my next step, I have a folded piece of scratch paper here. I'm going to sprinkle my embossing powder all over the surface. and blow away any of the excess. And now you can see my 3 trees are covered with embossing powder. Now we're going to emboss that, but I just want to put my embossing powder away. Okay. Put that out of the way. And we can use the back here. Okay. Now, using my heat tool, and I really like my Marvy embossing heat tool, I'm going to emboss those trees. And it doesn't take very long to emboss them. They'll come up very, very quickly, especially when you're using the detail powder. What's nice about the detail powder, the superfine detail powders, is the powder itself doesn't swell up too much when you're embossing. And because it doesn't swell up too much, you don't lose any of the detail. Okay. So now, as you can see, I've got my 3 beautiful snow-covered evergreens, and then it looks like the sky, maybe a dusk sky, is in the background. Now my next step is to cut this into 4 panels. So I'm going to grab my tonic cutter here and my piece of cardstock. Okay. So my piece measures 3 inches across. So I want to cut that directly in half, and I'm going to do that at 1.5 inches. And then my other piece measures 2.5 inches across, so I'm going to cut that at 1.25 inches. And this one the same thing, 1.25 inches. Okay, so those are my pieces. And let me move that out of the way, and I'll show you the next step.